This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, we are out in the, in a beautiful spot here in the Flemish countryside. Maybe not total countryside. We're in a small town of, what town are we in, Kris?
Essen near Dixmude.
Essen near Dixmude.
Essen.
Essen.
Yeah, Essen is with two S, and Essen is... If you pronounce it that way, you are near Antwerp. And once we had a visitor, and he saw on the airplane and on the airport, he said, "Oh, I have a train to Essen," but it was the other Essen with two S near Antwerp, the other direction. So he found no brewery, and I said, "You try Essen with one S, and then you will find."
I'm working on my Flemish pronunciation on this trip, and it will get better as we go. Kris Herteleer, co-founder of Dolle Brewery, for American listeners out there, or international listeners for that matter. You may know them for beers like Oerbier or Stillnacht or Oerbier, another one of theirs. Their Dolle Export Stout. Beers that have made it outside of here in Flanders and have made it out to make an impact out there on the world. Beers that brewer friends of mine have shared with me that were made right here. And now we get to come see where those are made, and these beers that have influenced lots of generations of brewers now over the last several decades. We're going to hear the story of Dolle. We're also going to hear about how you brew, because while you brew these beers that many consider modern beers, this is a very old brewery that you're brewing in, and you have found ways to make these beers within some historical equipment and using some very classic methods. And so we're going to talk about how you go about doing that for each of those beers. Before we do, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer. Andy Joint of Big Grove Brewery says,
"This is Andy Joint of Big Grove Brewery. We've been using G&D chillers from the beginning, and from our original 3.5 barrel pub system up to our production brewery. We've been able to rely on G&D to provide a high-quality chiller, help us with design and layout, and provide support whenever we need it."
Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring of your next G&D chiller. And ProBrew is the industry partner that brewers trust to take their operations to the next level, especially when it comes to canning their product for distribution. By partnering with ProBrew, brewers can fill and seam their canned product. It ranges from 100 to 600 cans per minute. Their unique filling process also ensures low dissolved oxygen pickup and focuses on product quality during the entire process. For more information, visit probrew.com or email them at contactus@probrew.com. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, you may have heard of Old Orchard, but have you heard of their newest flavors? Berry Blend, Blood Orange, Lemonade, and Tart Cherry are the latest additions to their lineup of flavored craft juice concentrate blends. Old Orchard's R&D team can also formulate custom blends unique to your needs. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, Kris, we normally start off the podcast with a bit of background. What is your background, and what led you to brewing, and what made you think we should start a brewery and then do that in Essen, in this old antique brewery that you now operate from?
Yeah, we are a family with 4 children, 3 of them being boys, 1 sister. And a brother of mine, Wart, he has broken the leg, and so the doctor says it would be a good idea to have a stout from time to time. And the stout was a Whitbread stout, and on the label it was marked recommended for invalids. And at that time it was allowed and normal, but the distribution of the beer was made by a man with the van, and he came by once a week, and he says, I'm out of Whitbread, but I have something else which is maybe better, and that's Guinness. And we tried the Guinness, and we said, "Oh, it's better." Not only because the taste is better, but it was 33 centiliters instead of 25. So it may be more expensive. It was better. So we were fans of Guinness, and we learned about stouts by having Guinness. And the first time we get that, we said, that's no beer. It's undrinkable. It's black. It's not. It's has no hoppy taste. It's not like no beer. But there must be a reason why so many people drink stout, and by having it more than one time, we will learn to appreciate the beer, and we still do.
So it was drinking stout as a teenager then that
16 years old, and we were intern, means we were in a school where we were there for the whole week, and we had 2 bottles of Guinness for the week, so we had to, and that was it. But we didn't like lager, because lager, we had, in going to school, there were a couple of pubs, and what happened with that pubs is that they were very simple, and they were always crowded by men who were always fighting and throwing the chairs on the street and everything. It was terrible. I said, what bad thing is in that beer? It was cheap beer and lager, pils, and the drinkers of that were at the same level of the beer, so it was not real, not real.
those lager people always causing trouble.
That was it.
So then you developed a love of beer and an interest in beer. How did you then decide to make a career from it?
My brother, who was student in doctor of medicine, he went to London to buy books, because obviously there were no books of medicine for sale here in Belgium, and everybody went to London to buy books. And then by coming back, he says, "I have something with me which will be very interesting." And I say, "Yeah, what has he with him?" Some glasses maybe he has kept in a pub or so, but it was not that. It was a beer kit, and a beer kit, you can still buy it in Boots or other chemistry, and you can make a beer out of it. And it was liquid malt extract, and then a paper with the recipe on. And the recipe says the more you had to add malt extract with water, and the more water you add, the more beer you have. But the more water you add, the weaker the beer, the less good is the beer. And so we learned that for having good beer, you use less water as possible. So the stronger beers for us were the best.
If you were going to go to the trouble, you were going to at least make strong beer for yourself.
No, but we compare that with the beers you can drink in pubs or in shops. And our favorites were the Trappist beers. And the Trappist beers, all of the Trappist beers in Belgium and else as well, are re-fermented in a bottle. And so we said, if that's the trick of the Trappist, we will do all the beers with re-fermentation in the bottles, especially because, technically spoken, if you have an installation of bottling, which is very simple, it's the only way to do it.
Sure. So you were homebrewing then?
Yes, we were homebrewing with the English beers, but the English beers, after that, we say we will not go on traveling to London after beer, and the result we don't like. We need to make real beer. A real beer means beer not with water from the mains, from real spring water we need. We need malt from the maltery, we need hops from the hop farm in flowers, not in pellets, not in syrup, and the malt. It was at that time, it was not legal to brew at home, and there were no shops providing malt and so. But there was a maltery in Bruges, and we say we will phone to Bruges to the maltery if it's possible to buy malt and different malts, because they had a lot of different malts. And we tried with the different malts, but they were very, very curious. They say, but you buy malt, what will you do with that? And I said, oh, you may guess 3 times. We will make beer out of that. And he says, but I say, it's not your problem. I have money with me, and I will pay you directly, and I'll get the malt. So that was the deal. We got the malt, and we tried with all the different malts they had. And finally, after 3 years, we had by tasting and retasting, and it was always blind tasting. We did not know what we were tasting. And we said, this is the best of all the 33 brews we had made. They were all different. And we called that beer Oerbier. And Oerbier means primitive beer, and simple beer without colorings, without enzymes, without filtration, all with re-fermentation in the barrel, without findings, all pure. And Oerbier means beer from the source, like in Czechoslovakia you have Pilsner Urquell. Urquell means the first and the oldest quell is source. Pilsner Urquell, the source of the pils all over the world. So we made Oerbier, and nowadays there should be maybe a problem with the names, but I think in Germany there is another beer which is named Oerbier or something similar, but it's we are patented just for the Benelux, so.
Sure. And when we are saying Oerbier, it's Oerbier, just so that it's very clear what beer we're talking about here. So you decided to take over a brewery here in Essen.
No, not directly, because we were students still, but we had a friend who was coming by, and we were bottling in bottles of 75 centiliters, big bottles, because in fact we hated bottling. We still hate it a little bit, because it's always stress, and you have to count how much bottle do you need. Do you have caps enough? Labels. What will be the name of the thing? With the labels, we didn't have a problem. We numbered it number 1, 2, 3, 4 till 33. We had no special names. Especially it was all Oerbier. Then we had all the beers, but we had too much beer. And my brother, he was a doctor by the time, and then he says, I will go to South America, and but before that I will help you a little bit in the brewery. And we had to taste a beer, what was the best beer, and we needed some friends to help us to empty the large bottles. And one of the friends, he knew another friend, and the other friend, he was in a brewery school, and he said, there are a lot of breweries, empty breweries in Flanders, and instead of working a whole day for having 20 liters, we should do something together, and I'm very rich, and I will hire or buy an old brewery, and then try to make a bit more than 20 liters per time. And so we saw the brewery here, and we saw other breweries as well. But this brewery was possible to make 30 hectoliters, 3,000 liters per brew, but was with a mashing tun, which was at the same time a loitering tun. So you make 1 brew per day, and you cannot make 2 brews per day because the mashing tun is still full with spent grain. So we say well, we will do it anyway, because if we don't do it now, we will have regrets later that we have better done that, and we were too shy or too. But then, thanks to the friend, we started the brewery here, and but the old brewery was 2 years without being in use, so it was we had to repair a lot of things, and we started that in 1980. And at that time, I had finished my studies of architecture, and I still had to go to the army. So the first brew was November 15 in 1980, and that's a special day because November 15 is the day of the king, and Dynasty Day, they call it. It's a day that people working for the government have a free day. They do not work, and the customs are part of them, and so they would not trouble us by controlling and to run in the way, like we say in Flemish. So it was a Saturday, November 15, 1980, that we started Oerbier with a recipe of 3 years of home brewing.
So you decided to take this old brewery over that had been not producing beer for a couple of years, and the first thing that you set out to do is make Oerbier work on this whole new brew house. What kind of challenge did that provide for you? Because this now has a whole bunch of different equipment from the way that you would have made Oerbier at home.
Well, in fact, it was not so different. What we had at home was a copper kettle, which serves for doing the clothes washing with a wooden fire, and the main difficulty was to control the temperature, because we had a lot of times the mash, which was burned to the bottom of the thing, to the high wooden fire. But a thing to relieve that, or to not having that, is stirring all the time. But that's very boring, stirring a couple of hours. And we did a double plate with holes on it, and so it was a kind of convection of everything, so it avoided of burning. And when we took over the brewery, the old brewer, he told about his membership of the brewers in Brussels. And then in Brussels, he says once a year there's a meeting with 20 brewers and so, and they have a crate of their own beer, and they taste it blind. That means that you don't know what beer you are tasting, and you give points on visual, all the things. And then we had made a beer, Oerbier, in small scale at home, and we had bottled it in big bottles of 75 centiliters, with a cork, because if we had a cap system which shows a little round in the cap, so you can see that it was not commercially capped, and it was home brewed beer. Maybe they would see that and say, it's all professional beer, it's not homemade things. And so we put a cap, not a cap, but a cork, and we had the best points of all. So the only thing is, they say it's a bit, in commercial terms, it's maybe hard to sell that, because it's so strong. It was strong because it was not washed. We did not wash it, and the intensity of the taste is better. Is more intense if you do not wash. It's like making coffee.
You say wash, you mean sparge.
Sparge, yes. Yeah. If you make coffee, it's better not to sparge, and you have more coffee when sparging, but you have less taste, and we do it not for the quantity, but for the taste and the quality.
The just first runnings beer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's flip and talk about brewing Oerbier, the whole design of this, because it seems it's kind of cool to think that Oerbier is a 45 plus year project for you, even more than that, from home brewing days into professional brewing. And then the last 44 years of that being here at this brewery. And that's a lot of time to focus on a beer and how it changes, because even that idea of that can certainly change decade by decade or ingredient year by ingredient. I'm curious to think about where it was and how that is, how you originally developed it and how now that beer is brewed. Before we do that, experience distinct transparency and juiciness with Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5 using their Lumina technology Omega genetically eliminated haze in the popular British 5 strain, allowing you to preserve the fruit-boosting prowess while achieving crystal clarity. Perfect for modern West Coast IPAs. Learn more at info@omegayeast.com. Also, RSS Macklin, a family-owned company started by the head of seaming technology from PS Angeles and SME and field service technician for Ball Corp, offers audits and repairs for can seamers and can integrity training. With experience from big breweries, they bring valuable knowledge to craft businesses. They provide solutions for can damage, seam training, and they'll help your facility become self-sufficient without relying on OEMs. If you have any questions regarding your machine setup, parameters, or concerns about your can line, call them at 330-299-8210 or email them at service@rssmacklin. That's RSSMACLIN.com. Also, Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Brewers worldwide trust Indie's unique varieties, Strata, Lorien, Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia, to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroir, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling, thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com/podcast to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short, let's make it flavorful. So let's talk about the concept behind Oerbier in a broad sense. You wanted to make strong beer as opposed to the much lighter lager or more popular styles in the 1970s as you were building this, and you wanted to build layers of strong flavor in it. What are how did you start in writing a recipe, and how does the recipe look now compared to where you started with it?
Now, in the very beginning, we had no recipe at all. We had no knowledge at all. But my brother Jo, he has brought a book, Penguin's book, How to Make Beer at Home. It was an English pocket book, and it was mostly the most essential things on which were interesting to make beer, because we knew that beer was made with water, malt, hops, and yeast. But that's simply said, but that's more complex than that. And the way you brew is that you have to make a porridge and to warm it up at 63 degrees and 73 degrees, and then you have all kinds of sugar that you can ferment later after being boiled, and then you have different hops and different malts as well. And we have tried the different malts during 3 years, and always trying blind tasting what is better, this and that, and afterwards we said, oh, that's due to that and that and that. But the complexity of everything is a search of your own, and some people they desperate want to get the right amounts of different malts, but I must say that we had 7 kinds of malt, and they came from a maltery which stopped after 5 years, and that was more than 5 years, after 20 years, and so we had to adjust our beers, because caramel 250, for example, which is a kind of dark malt, is the same name in another maltery, but it's like a completely other taste. So you have to restart from zero. Especially in 2000, we had another problem, which was even more difficult, is that the supply of yeast was no more possible. So the brewery where we are from, Roeselare, and the brewery there supplied yeast to anybody who wants yeast for healthy reasons, because yeast is very healthy. You can solve zona, a disease which is with nerves, and you can heal it with eating yeast. And probably, but nobody knows, is that the director has got benefits of that, and by having that, he supplied yeast to anybody who would need some yeast. And yeast, you can buy it in a pharmacy as well, but they are dried yeast. And if you buy the yeast there and you dissolve it in wort, it does not work. It's maybe, I don't know if it's having still the vitamin B, but it doesn't work for making a fermentation. And on the box, it's mentioned that it's coming from Westmalle Trappist yeast. So I don't know how they dry it with lyophilization or whatever, but that yeast is good in taste, but not in yeast activity, in fermentation activity.
So this brewery in Roeselare, you used to get yeast from, and you had to switch yeasts in 2000. How did you change the yeast culture that you ferment with?
Yeah, we were.
And we should say we're drinking now a bottle from before 2000, which did use that old yeast, and it's a beautiful beer that's still vibrant, today, and has obviously lived a long life already, and still is absolutely gorgeous. How you needed to make a switch to that.
Yeah, we would not like to change the yeast completely, because the yeast we have been used it for 20 years, but every time getting fresh yeast from the brewery. And then we had books on yeast. And one of the books, over some of the books, they say you can reuse the yeast again and again. And so what you have to do is to make propagation. You have a good thing is having a microscope and to see what's in the yeast, if there's just Saccharomyces cerevisiae, if there are other things living in. And in the yeast of Rodenbach, because that was the yeast we were using, there were 3 kinds of things. There was Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the normal yeast, which is in fact in the way they use the yeast was a lazy yeast, fermented just 70% of the sugars, and was then stopping and letting over by 2 other things which are in that yeast as well. And it's like they call it symbiosis. They are living together and needing each other and fighting for each other. And it's like a marriage with 3, but the Lactobacillus, which are present and so they get for the acidity in the taste, and they give things which hinder the two others, the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and there's another thing is the Pediococcus. Pediococcus is in the microscope small points, and sometimes they are grouped together in 3 or 4, and in old books you may find them as called sarcines, and sarcines is considered as a very bad thing. But in the way of the Rodenbach yeast is the complexity of these things, which gives not only alcohol, because Saccharomyces cerevisiae gives alcohol. Then you have the freshness and the fruitiness and the whole thing done by the two others. So by recultivating this, we have a wort which is much different than the wort of the beer of Rodenbach, which is we call that a poor wort. It's 1040 original gravity, and ours is 1080. So that's double in density, but in IBU, that's the bitterness units, we have 33, and Rodenbach has at that time only a bit more than 10. So it was 3 times more bitter, and especially the Pediococcus and the Lactobacillus, they are hindered not once, but after reusing them a couple of times, they were starving and they were dying. So the only one which came to activity was the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, with a little bit remain of the sourness and the whole thing. So that means with the same recipe and the beer which we made with the 1080 original gravity came to a fermentation that gave 7.5% alcohol. Now with the same recipe, with the yeast which got stronger and stronger, it comes to 9%. But the Christmas beer we have has even more malt and more boiling and more everything, and has a density of 1100. It was at the time, was boiling for 5 hours, and it once had a density in degrees Plato of 26. Now it's 22, but yeah, it's still very high, and the density, the alcohol percentage of Stille Nacht at the time was 9, and now it has 12. And even the Reserva, but it's a story apart. Reserva is the Stille Nacht aged into wooden barrels, and due to the evaporation through the barrels, there goes 10% lost, Angel's share, but it increases the alcohol percentage as well. So instead of 12%, it gets 13%.
That's interesting. So with this more highly attenuating yeast, you simply changed the labels and made it a 9% beer instead of a 7.5% beer for Oerbier?
Well, I don't think we changed labels. We used the labels further, and we didn't have yet.
But you were okay with it now as a 9 because your strong beer is something you enjoyed.
Yeah, but
and it didn't change the balance for you then between the residual sweetness of the beer, or maybe that's what brought it into balance. That now, with that additional dryness and that additional alcohol, that actually made it more drinkable.
In the beginning, we had to change things like changing the kinds of malt we chose, because in the beginning it was a very, very dark malt. I think we used burnt malt,
roasted,
roasted malt, yes. But just a little bit, but we had to change, especially then we had another maltery. We had to get used to that, and that took us 5 years to have a beer which was as good as in 2000. We had suffered and had not bad beer, but we said our balance of malt is so sought after that even with a normal yeast, let's say a Trappist yeast, our beer will be better because the other beers are made with colorings, which is second rank coloring, having the darkness.
Second rank for sure. And in fact, this brewery you mentioned as we were touring through earlier, when you took over and went into the lab, that coloring was a big thing that they did.
Yeah, but we know that the beer here was made with coloring. See, the beer of the Cosmos was a beer which was pale beer, and they had a dark version of it, and it was called Opt, and the Opt was dark because it was not brewed with dark malts. It was after the boil was colored with colorings, and the colorings, they had two things in the lab which were valuable, and there was one wheel which you could see how much colorings you had to add for having that specific color you wanted, and then another a balance which could measure the amount of saccharine. And saccharine was a sweetener they added to the beer to mask the acidity of the beer. Because if you age a beer, especially above 20 degrees centigrade, you have a risk of contamination by acetic acid, and that's very people like lactic acid, but acetic acid is very hard. It's very rough, and if you can mask it by things like high percentage of alcohol, that's a good thing. Bitterness, less good, because bitterness and acidity does not work together, and but with a kind of sweetness, artificial or not, it helps as well, because then you get a balance, bitter and sweet, and that's always a good thing.
Sure. I would love to talk a little bit more about how that balance works, because again, we're here in Flanders, and we've had bruin while we're here, and while this beer doesn't, maybe it's obviously different than some of those beers, it also shares a commonality with those beers too. And I would love to hear from your perspective, what that family tree looks like. Before we do that, Berkeley Yeast, founded by bioengineers, yeast that's designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency, increase efficiency, and save you money. If you've been following yeast, I'm sure you've heard about their strains. Super Bloom strains make classic hops flavors. Fresh strains keep diacetyl low, even with large hop additions. Tropics strains make a tropical bouquet reminiscent of the finest Southern Hemisphere hops. And they just dropped new strains that are even more futuristic. Nationwide free shipping in the United States. Mention this podcast for 20% off of your first order. And if you're a brewer who's also interested in distilling, subscribe now to the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast, available on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Hosted by Sydney Jones, head distiller for Few Spirits in Chicago, and Molly Troop, master distiller for Freeland Spirits in Portland, Oregon. This podcast explores the technical and creative processes behind great spirits through conversations with some of the leading distillers working today. It's everything you love about the Craft Beer Brewing Podcast, but focused on distilling. Click on the link in the show notes and give it a listen. So from your perspective, how does Oerbier fit into this picture of Flemish beers, Ab and Bruin, and this lightly tart or sour and darker beer, piece that has historically been associated with this area. Your beer does and also doesn't fit into an easy category there.
No, we don't want categories. And once we had the visit, and some Italians, they say, but in what category are you? I say we were starting with beers which were not existing. And I remember the first article in the newspaper. It was a small article, and it was in the newspaper, it lost the news. And the journalist, he has sampled the beer, and he did not believe us. He says that's not a beer that you have made, that's you have put a Trappist and a Rodenbach together. And it was written in the newspaper like that, and I have written a letter back. I don't know, you are wrong. You have to come to the brewery to see us working and everything. But we didn't saw the journalist again. So it was like that. Everybody wrote things that they thought. Was that bad or not bad? It was.
Well, I mean, it doesn't sound like a terrible thing to me. And in fact, I mean, here we are where you are between great Trappist breweries and great, Oerbier breweries. And, it seems like that would almost be a natural kind of thing to play with. But this beer has some intention on your part to have some character from those beers, but not be those beers.
No. A typical thing is to have the balance of sourness and alcohol, and the dark brown are in fact less sweet. They have a character which is drinkability, more to the tartness if you consider a Rodenbach. Others are more sweeter. Everybody has the same character of some tartness in it, but the density of those beers are just 6%, 5 or 6%, and that's old brain. And most of the old brains are not have no caramel malt or very little, are darkened by coloration, and then have no much bitterness. Most of them are aged into foeders, and foeders gives a certain taste, which is lactic as well, because it ages in large foeders, we call that. That's open vats, and wooden vats, which gives a specificity, and they make a kind of vinegary beer that they put at the rate of 25% into fresh beer. They do not re-ferment. They pasteurize that because they fear if you do re-fermentation, maybe you will have accident with the lactic acid bacteria, which will eat or not eat, or will be blocked to sugars and everything. And that's a thing that most of the brewers, they fear, they do not trust, because sooner or later you get problems with the re-fermentation in the bottles. And that's why big brewers never consider to make re-fermentation beers, because who's then, if there are problems, the brewer has done a mistake, or always due to the brewer. So no one brewer who loves his job, he will say, we will have a better beer with re-fermentation, but the re-fermentation makes a better beer, in my opinion, not only in taste, but in aging and in oxidation as well. It gives the beer a longer life.
And these beers have quite the long life, and so that's definitely a design goal for you, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back and talk about Stille Nacht also, but I would love to also explain about the brew house that you make these beers in, because it does have unique features. like a Baudelot chiller and a coolship. And in fact, all of the beers that you make here go through that process, come out of the kettle into the coolship, not with the intention of inoculating the beer there in the coolship. And then they, go through that cooling process, and you then engage in open fermentation first. Talk about that technical process and how and why you use that now.
No, we use that because it was like that, and it was it's in old books. You see designs of English brew houses which are exactly the same, and that's a brewery which is 200 years old. You have a mashing tun in cast iron with a system of stirring, mixing the grain and the water. And for increasing the temperature, you can do that by adding hot water from underneath and to stir it again. So we do it with two temperatures, 63 degrees centigrade and 73 degrees centigrade. And that gives us the wanted sugars. Then we filter, and we do not sparge at all. So we will.
But it's a very large mash tun.
Yeah.
That can still handle that much malt for a first running beer.
That's why we said that's a nice brew house, because you can easily calculate how much malt you can use, and for the malt of Oerbier, it's 700 kilos of malt for 3,000 liters of wort. And then for Stille Nacht, you can even use 1,000 kilos of malt, which gives no problem at all in filtering and so. But 1,000 kilos of malt is already not the maximum, but nearly the maximum of that. And then with boiling, you can boil as long as you can. And before we started, when the first brew we had of the prototype of Stille Nacht was a special brew, which is now we still have one bottle, but just for looking. And it was exactly the best beer we ever have made. It was a black beer, and it has a density which was more than 1,200, I think. And it boiled for 6 hours. We started up at 6 o'clock in the morning because it was too cold to get to sleep anymore. And we say, well, we will start brewing, and it brewed for 6 hours, always like that. And then you have the evaporation of 8% in the coolship. So that made a beer which was very, very thick. And we added the yeast, and we had problems with everything on that, with brewing, with fermentation, temperatures, and that was not fermenting in 1 week. It needs 2 weeks, probably due to the coldness of the winter. And then it has to lager, and we found a small aluminium tank to lager it, because all the tanks at the time were different in sizes. So we put it in one tank and then in another tank, and we had to clean the aluminium tank by a brush which was in copper. You go into the tank and you brush everything. It was a terrible work. It was and then after 1 year of lagering, we try re-fermentation. But re-fermentation was one of the problems on our beers, because we used Rodenbach yeast for that, and the Rodenbach yeast is lazy. So he says, what, you want me to work? I don't want to work. And we asked to Rodenbach, how can you do that? Re-fermentation with that beer. And they looked very strange. They say, oh, what are you asking? No, we don't do re-fermentation. We we do saturation. Saturation is putting gas on it.
Or forced carbonation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they pasteurize, and that's it. They can sell the beer without any problem because there is foam on it, but there's no re-fermentation. So they could not help us, and we had to try. And we did, I don't know if we still had the way of doing tests with different amount of sugars and different amount. I think we had not yet a microscope or so. So we did the yeast by weight, so much liters of yeast. But what was the density? How much cells did you have? We didn't know. And the result of that was that the re-fermentation of that beer did not work at all. And this was flat beer, and a whole batch of that beer, which was expensive beer, Stille Nacht, the most expensive, the best, most ingredients, everything. And it was like that. And one of the clients in the time was Dirk van Dijk from the Culminator, a pub in Antwerp. And he said, you're still with that beer and you don't sell it? I said, no, it's not foaming. So we were very ashamed of making a beer which was flat. Nowadays you could explain and say it's a flat beer, it's like wine and so. But in the time, no. The people said, mad brewers, they are making jokes and so, but they would better try to make beer with re-fermentation. And so we kept that beer. We didn't sell it didn't let it taste because. And half a year later, Dirk van Dijk came back and he said, "Have you changed? What will you do with that? Otherwise, I buy the whole brew." I say, "Well, that's a good idea because it's." You can get it at the price of Oerbier because we can rid of it, and we will not sell it. And he kept it in his cellar, and so there was yeast in it, but the yeast was blocked by the density, by everything, maybe osmotic pressure or whatever. But after 6 years, they came live in it. And that beer foamed, doing nothing, just waiting. And that was, in fact, even with the re-fermentation, was the best. He's still Dirk van Dijk, and he had all the beers of Belgium, and he said that was definitely the best beer of Belgium. And it was a special. The name was. We didn't find special beer. We say special brew for the first anniversary of the Dolle brewers. It was mentioned on the label, brewed on 26 December 1981, and then we had 220 boxes of beer of 20 bottles, and we have sold everything to him. And he has sold that. You were able to taste it if you took a vertical of 10 different beers of Stille Nacht. then you could taste that. But now he's out of it, and we as well. So
sure. Well, I want to come back briefly and talk about how you thought about designing that beer. But I still want to finish talking about the coolship before we do that. It's an interesting feature that you have a large copper coolship and that all of your beers go through that coolship, but not for the process of inoculation, just for cooling and for hop additions too.
Yeah. Once in 1990s or something, I was invited by an American importer. And he did a show with all simple questions. And so he says, the first thing that people say when they see a copper coolship open, they say, then you risk infection. But in fact, I defended Oerbier a little bit by saying, no, it's too warm. And there is another reason as well, and I may be right, I may be not right, is that we use a lot of hops. And in the hops, there is a yellow powder in it, and there is hop oil. And by boiling, the hop oil comes into the liquid, which is the wort. And when it runs into the coolship, the first thing is that the flowers of the hops are kept apart in the filter. And then the wort runs into it, and the oil of the hop oil comes above and makes like a skin that avoids the wild ferments to get in contact with the wort.
Oh, that's interesting. So you think there's an antibacterial? Obviously, there's an antibacterial property to hops themselves.
Yeah, but
and when they have such thick oil in a coolship, then
even without the oil, the bacteria would die as well. So there's a double thing. You have the hop oil, and you have the temperature. So, but when it's cooling, it stays there for a bit, an hour and a half, and then you have
and it drops from boiling to about 80 C.
From 100 degrees, a little bit more, till after 1 hour, 80 degrees centigrade, and it has an evaporation of 8%. So that means that you have another increase of density by doing nothing. So it's a good thing if you are making high gravity beers and very strong beers. So after 1 hour, it's settled. Small parts of malt which goes through the bottom of that, they go down, and the perfectly clear wort is running over the Baudelot cooler. And the Baudelot cooler is an invention of a French engineer, and he has done that in 1857. And by doing that, I don't know if he had the aim of doing two inventions at the same time, but he did. He was dropping the temperature from 80 degrees till 25 degrees by a system of tubes where the cold water passes into it, and the warm wort drops from 80 degrees till 25 degrees. But there is another thing which is very essential to me, and that's the oxygen comes into the wort as well, because it runs at the exterior of the tubes, and by colder temperature there is a cold oxidation, and oxidation means that oxygen gets into a liquid, and the colder it is, the better it works. So at the end, there is oxygenation from the air, which is not pure, because we do not have an installation to filter the air which is on the outside of the Baudelot, but it goes so quickly that we add the yeast that we don't really fear potential contamination by things which are not wanted and which are in the air. We have open fermenters as well, which are in copper. And the thing is, in copper, if you see it in very detailed way, copper is a metal which cannot be polished, which is raw anyway, which is very hard to clean. And we have special cleaning products which will save the copper, and which are different than cleaning products meant for
stainless steel,
which are more aggressive. But in copper, if you see it very close, it's not very. You cannot polish it. It's raw, and it stays raw. So, is it possible that part of the taste of the beer that we make comes from from the fermenter, which is in copper, which is open, and maybe have interactions with the air and the atmosphere of the brewery. It's possible.
And so in those copper open fermenters, you ferment with the mixed culture?
We do, yes.
So some Saccharomyces, some Lactobacillus,
Yes.
and some Pediococcus.
Pediococcus, no. No. We do that and we see how it works, and we do that for Oerbier, we do that for Stille Nacht. We don't do that for Arabier, and stout as well. We do it. Yes.
And so, for something like Oerbier, that fermentation, how much of that happens then in copper, and then how you move it to another fermentation from there, or maturation?
We have a small fermenter where we can grow the Lactobacillus, and that we do, and after 2 days we mix it with the fermentation, and then the idea of that is that Lactobacillus will be stopped by the alcohol, and since once it's sometimes it's one after 1 day we do it, sometimes after 2 days. It depends when we have time and so. And when we have a beer, we have brewed on Friday or on Saturday. Normally we do it on Sunday morning. But the idea behind that is that the Lactobacillus will be hindered by the alcohol produced in the 2 days time by the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is true because you can measure the density. It has dropped, and you can see how much.
So you give the Saccharomyces a head start so that it can do a lot of the fermentation and give the Lactobacillus.
And then
less.
the Lactobacillus, if they are strong enough, they will go further, but we have never had that they went further. They were always blocked, and that's they why do that? Because it gives a freshness in taste. If you don't do that, sometimes we take a sample with tasting the difference, and the difference is great. It's much difference.
Let's talk about Stille Nacht a little bit, and think about how this beer, say, differs from Oerbier, and how you went about creating a different iteration of strong beer. That's that of course is even a notch stronger than Oerbier.
Yeah, but in the beginning, the first batch of special brew was dark, and our first Stille Nacht was dark as well, and so we had people were being very happy. I say, I want that good Oerbier again. I say Oerbier, if you say Oerbier is not good enough, I will change the recipe. I will put just pale malt in it. And since then, Stille Nacht was a bit different than other Christmas beer, because the Christmas beer is normally dark. It's always dark, but Stille Nacht was one of the exceptions. Bon Vœu from Dupont is another one, another pale Christmas beer, and maybe Kerstbeer from Slagmutter in Ninove was blonde as well. But normally Christmas beer is very sweet, very stomach filling, very strong as well. But ours was that, but without spices. We have never used spices. We feel that spices is a help for beers which are not okay. to hide mistakes or to hide things you'd better not have.
So you wanted to because you all like to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
There's an artistic vibe here. You want to be outside the norm and also challenge those popular assumptions around those things. You wanted to make a holiday beer that was more pale.
Yep.
How did you still build a Dolle flavor into it without any spices?
I just you don't need spices to have taste. You have to play with ingredients, hops, yeast. Yeast plays an important role as well, and the amount of all that. If you have since 2010, I think there was something like a beer festival in Antwerp, in Essen. And they did a beer festival just with Christmas beers. And in the beginning, there were not so many Christmas beers in Belgium. We were one of the first, I think. No, Dupont was before us. But it was not a tradition of Belgium. Christmas beers was more a tradition of England and some Danish as well, and but soon after, everybody, all the brewers that came to here and they tried our beer and they say, yeah, you make good beer. It's not only funny, but we will do the same. And so to make a special beer for Christmas, they were joking and they say, oh, you need a bag of sugar and you need a funny name and then you have Christmas beer and you can charge what you want. And that's they didn't talk about re-fermenting or making it better or what they could do different to them, a different label, and that's it.
Fair. Well, let's zoom out and look at the big picture now as we finish up here. You've been here at Dolle for 44 years now this year. That's a long time to be making these wild and crazy high density beers that you make. The beer world has also shifted a little bit since then, and there's more of these beers available. More available made by brewers in various parts of the world. Of course, the United States is also a big part of audience for your beer, and now there's lots of brewers in America also making a lot of these crazy high density beers too. But you've also been at it a very long time, and you have to be thinking about what the future looks like. And so for you and Dolle, how do you look at the next 5 years and the next 10 years for this brewery? Because you've always been both pushing limits, but also doing it in this beautiful old historical brewery and finding ways to connect the future and this progress and experimentation, but also connect that back to the past. How do you see the next 5 or 10 years of Dolle from here?
We are not so much looking to what other breweries does, because otherwise we would think in making a light beer. We don't like light beer, so non-alcoholic beer. It's even worse than that. It's not a beer, but we are interested into what you can make with barrel aging, for example, not with whiskey, not with rum, not with cognac, which are or Armagnac or Calvados, which are in fact dead beers. There are no living things in those barrels, and some brewers, they don't understand that. They say, that's selling. There is a need for that. We need to have it, and we do it in whiskey bottles or in anything. But they don't get it. What the wine bottles and the kind of wine can do with beer and to make a marriage with the Lactobacillus of the wine, and there is the wine kind of pediococcus, and they have all kinds of names and no names, but the French, they call that le terroir, and that's everything except Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So that means from year to year there's another wine, and that's due to le terroir, the sun, and the circumstances which are different. And in fact, that was a little bit like us in the beginning. We had yeast, which was a little bit different as well, because there was no need to have always the same. And we, even for Oerbier, we had different colors on the labels. And one time it was brown, one was pink and red, dark red, black, even black labels we have got, and it was marked on the label, keep it for no more than 100 days. And it was, we thought it would turn sour, and maybe sometimes it did. That's 40 years ago, eh? But in fact, a thing to not have that is to increase your alcohol percent. And before Oerbier was 7.5, and now it's 9. And the Reserva, which is this one, is even 10% more due to the work of evaporation.
And so you think the future is in wine barrel aging, or is there anything else that you're thinking about over the next 5 or 10 years?
Maybe it's always something which I think about, but I'm already thinking about is to make a visualization of the taste of the beers. So to make a painting of a beer, you can paint that or that. What do you want? What do you prefer? So if you prefer this painting, then you will prefer that beer, like that.
Interesting, because you are a visual artist and you love.
I do, yes.
And
but I'm too much pictorial. When I see someone, I want to draw his face. I know to see it abstract, and to put colors and to say that's him, because that's not yet into that stadium. maybe later.
But that's a fantastic idea, to think about what someone might like based on how they react to art and aesthetics, rather than just asking, hey, what other food or drinks do you like?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting, different kind of approach, but also thoughtful and something we might expect from here at Dolle. Choose G&D chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. Take your operations to the next level with the experts at ProBrew. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5 gives you juicy modern hop flavors without the haze. Trust Indie Hop's unique varieties to modernize, brighten, and diversify your beer lineup. Berkeley Yeast strains are designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency. And if you're a distiller or curious about it, check out the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. If you've enjoyed the podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, subscribe to the Craft Beer and Brewing magazine, Brewing Industry Guide, or all access video classes, and let us know that the content that we bring to you every week here on the podcast and through all of our other channels really does matter to you. Kris, if people want to learn more about Dolle and the beers that you make, where can they find you in the digital world as well as in the real world?
So in the real world, it's simple. On Saturday afternoon, we are open, and then on Sunday afternoon, we do a tour at 2 o'clock. So except holidays, we are available, and we have a bar in the brewery, and you can see everything.
And then if people want to find your beers, it's carried by importers across the world in many different countries and at some of the better beer shops.
We have a website, and that's www.oerbier.be. And then you find all the importers and everything.
That sounds great. Well, thank you for talking with me about how you make these beers. It's been wonderful to drink some old beers and see this beautiful old brewery and talk to you about your creative approach to brewing. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.